I'm Kay Daigle, and I'd like to welcome you to our video series, Listening Well. And I am talking today with Sherry Husband, whom I've known for about 4 years. Okay. And as I thought about the need for small group leaders to listen well in many ways, I thought of Sherry. Sherry is a trained spiritual director. She is the Director of Leadership Development for Grafted Life Ministries. She has an MA in theology, and it has been a privilege for me to get to know her. And the reason that I felt that she would be the right person for a Listening Well series is because I was blessed to be in a small group of hers for about a year, and I saw her practice listening well. She's very, very good at it, and she does what she teaches. She practices what she teaches. So thank you for being part of this, Sherry. As I think about listening, I think about the fact that our culture does not really prize that very much. And it makes it difficult for us because we don't have a lot of models for listening. And even as small group leaders, we know we want to hear well, but we don't always do it.
Right.
How did you learn to value listening yourself?
Yeah. Well, thank you, first of all, for inviting me to come and do this. This is something I am very passionate about, and it's been an important part of my journey with the Lord. And, it starts back about 15 years ago when I found myself asking the Lord for a prayer partner, but I didn't even know what that meant, but I knew it meant something different. And fast forward about 3 years, and I'd found her, and we were going through the 1-year Bible together. And I would say that really kind of messed with me in some pretty significant ways because I found myself realizing there was so much the Lord was offering here in terms of what relationship with Him could be like. And I'd been a faithful student of the Word. I'd loved serving in the church. We were doing that together as a couple, my husband and I, and yet there was things that weren't coming alive in my life that the Lord was promising on the pages of Scripture. And so that... fast forward a few more years, led me to a very significant conversation on the beach with the Lord, where I was just really pouring out my heart about these questions and the heartache that was in them and the desire to know Him better. And as I was walking, the verses that came to mind was the scripture where Jesus is talking about love me with all that you are. And I was grasping for what were those words, your body, your spirit, and then the second part of that, love your neighbor as yourself. And I walked away from the beach that day knowing that I didn't know what it meant to love the Lord, my God, with everything that I was. And I really did want to know that. And I didn't know what it meant. I knew we were supposed to love each other, but I didn't really know. I didn't have a clue about what it meant to love somebody like I was supposed to be loving myself. And it just felt like the beginning of a conversation where I was going to do a lot of listening, and the Lord was going to be showing me some really important things from that point forward, and that turned out to be true.
Well, that is a wonderful personal story to explain how you got so involved in listening. As you think about listening as a small group leader, because obviously you've incorporated what you're talking about way beyond just that initial personal conversation with God. How does that personal conversation with God play into what a small group leader needs to do?
I think that listening usually requires some kind of quiet. And the quiet is helpful with the distractions. So the way our culture completely pushes against this for each one of us is how distracted we are. I've been finding, even as I'm sitting in conversation with people, we don't even have to have a device in front of us for our conversations to be really random. Like, we're so used to random information coming in at us and just putting that into the conversation that we're doing that with each other. Even in conversation. So I think helping each other acknowledge how distracted we are and asking the Lord to help us focus in for our time into some listening. And I love that listening doesn't have to just be in a quiet space. Like sometimes listening for me is very active in the sense that it's out on a walk. So there's a quietness to it, but there's an activity to it. So I think part of it is figuring out where are we least distracted and most able to open up our ears to the Lord.
So as you began to listen more to God, as you began to practice that, what are some things that you learned about listening to God?
Yeah. There were a couple things that turned out to be things that the Lord gave me right off, and they felt like such protection for me. Because when you've had such a powerful encounter with the Lord, and you know He's really helping you with, giving you these words and these places to focus in your relationship with Him, it can be a temptation to demand that it's like that a lot. And so I felt like the Lord was just really saying, trust me with this. Like, take in what I'm saying, follow me, keep learning, keep being open, but don't demand that it's like this all the time. And so that was humbling and yet rich at the same time. Like I really received that as a protection from the Lord. And then the other thing that I was real concerned about was failing to be discerning. I wanted to have a discerning heart, and that was early on too. For me was important because when you start to listen to the Lord or listen for Him in everyday life, you start to be afraid. Am I hearing myself? Is this God? Is this the enemy trying to deceive me? How am I going to know when this is really coming from the Lord? And so that became something I would pay attention to. And I think the safeguards that the Lord provided for me in that is other people who are doing the same thing, who love the Lord, are passionate about the truth. And I could talk with them about what I was hearing. And the other thing that I thought was really cool is the Lord helped me see that just hold it loosely, like hold it by faith. If this is of me, it's true. And it's not just kind of true, it's like forever kind of true. And that gave me the courage to keep listening patiently.
And I think some of that has always scared me, because when I feel like I've heard from the Lord, I'm like, but was that really God? Was that really God? And it is, because you do want to be so careful. And I'm always slow to suggest that God told me something to anybody, because I'm not always sure it's really God suggesting it.
Yeah. And I think inviting people into that discernment with us is like a posture of humility with that when we've heard from the Lord. Like, I think this is what the Lord might be up to, but I'd love for you to pray about that with me. I'm not certain yet. I'm still walking it out by faith and seeing what happens. And so then we can bring other people into that process with us. And I think there's protection in that.
That's great. So those are some of the things that you were taught to avoid as you learn to listen. What are some positive, constructive things that you learn to do in order to better hear God?
Yeah, I think, coming to know my story a little bit better turned out to be a really good idea. Like reflecting back on the times when the Lord, because He doesn't speak in these ways all the time with us, they seem to have like pivotal moments, or when there's real desperate need, when we really do need to hear directly from Him, that these kinds of words or engagements with the Lord, come about. And so realizing that the Lord had really met me in very loving ways, and when He was asking me, when there wasn't a lot of new direction that was coming, that there was some reason why He was asking me to be patient and prayerful and learn to be okay in the waiting. That was important too. So, that was huge. Learning to be okay in the waiting, that took a lot. The Lord and I had a lot of conversation about how I didn't want to do that.
It's hard for all of us.
Yeah. It might be one of the hardest things that we learn to do.
It really is. And it kind of goes back to your demanding that God speak, because we want Him on a timetable.
Yes.
We're so used to everything happening so quickly in our world. It's like, well, I don't seem to have heard from God, so I'm just going to do something.
Yeah. Right.
And how does that play out as a small group leader? Is there something specific you would be doing in listening to God as a leader, or is this just part of your life?
It does play out in, I think, significant ways with other people, because they're in a trusting journey as well. Like they're learning to trust the Lord. They have their own questions they've asked God about. And sometimes they have direction that they're living into. Sometimes they have, like they need someone to come alongside them and help them endure the waiting patiently for the Lord to direct the next step. Sometimes it's not always about guidance. It's also about undoing things we believe about God that aren't true, and embracing what the scripture reveals to us about who God actually is. And so that's been a very significant thing too in small group. Those things kind of come up and out of us in a small group where we are really able to be honest with one another. You know, I don't know if God's going to protect me here. And so I'm not going, you know, towards that thing because I'm afraid of what might happen. And so I'm stuck back here. Like if someone confesses to something like that in a group, it's just good to be with one another in the real questions.
Great. It really is. It really is. And that's the type of group that allows growth spiritually, allows women to be more of a disciple than ever before. And because the group is listening to God at the same time.
Yeah, I love that you just, use the word disciple, because I think one of the things that's become a focus for me is this invitation to follow me. Like, Jesus really said that, and he really wants us to be followers of him. And being honest about where I'm really at and checking whether or not I'm really willing to follow has been like one of the most important ideas of discipleship for me. Because sometimes I realize, I'm not ready to follow, and this is why I'm not ready to follow. This is what I'm not trusting. And other times like, oh yeah, I do trust you. I've been down this road before. I'm willing to do this again. And we step into what God's asking.
Well, why is it so important to listen to God and really put yourself somewhat in the role of a small group leader? Is this sort of an addition to your time? Or why would you take that kind of time to really be quiet before God and listen?
I used to think I understood a lot about myself and a lot about the world, and the more I listen to the Lord, the more I realize how little I understand about myself and about the world. So the listening posture is a teachable posture. And so it matters, especially when there'd been so much investment in knowing, and knowing wasn't yielding a truly surrendered, obedient, following heart. This component of adding not only knowing about, but listening to God and listening for his love, listening for why he was trustable, listening for his direction, like all of those things combined actually helped me have the life he was promising me.
And so you're the person that can lead other people along that path.
Right,
basically.
right. So, so much of leadership is modeling, especially in this particular dynamic. So sharing my stories of sitting with God and asking God my questions, what the Lord has revealed to me in that, how it's been helpful to me, what the fruit has been of that. Like some of these stories, you're not sharing with everyone right in the midst of it, because you are walking by faith in it a little bit, and you're not totally certain, what's 100% true. But as you get farther down the road into your story, and you're like, this matches Scripture, this is what God has promised, then you can, fully develop that out and share that with people, so they get the opportunity of hearing that process of relationship development with God and making a choice. Do I want this too? Am I willing to listen to the Lord? And what's going to happen if I listen?
Well, thank you, Sherry, for sharing this. And I am looking forward to our next 2 videos in the series. In the next one, we are going to discuss how to listen really when you're in the small group meeting itself, and then the final one will be the after of listening to God. Sherry she has developed some questions for reflection to process each video that are on our website at beyondordinarywomen.org. On our resource, if you look under our resources, you will be able to find those. And I do look forward to our next conversation. If you have any questions about anything that we have talked about, please contact us at Beyond Ordinary Women, and I'd love to talk with you or pray with you and help you in any way that I can.
Thank you.
Thank you.